I never thought I'd be one of those people. You know the ones I'm talking about, the statistics you hear on the news, the faces you try not to make eye contact with at intersections. But there I was, 42 years old, cramped in the back seat of my 2008 Honda Civic, with a garbage bag full of clothes as my pillow and a winter coat as my blanket. The windows were fogged up from my breathing, and I could see the orange glow of the streetlight trying to pierce through the condensation. It was 3 in the morning, and I couldn't sleep because my hip was digging into the seatbelt buckle and my feet were ice cold, despite wearing 2 pairs of socks. The divorce papers had been finalized exactly 17 days ago. 17 days since my 15-year marriage to Daniel ended. 17 days since I signed away my claim to the house because I couldn't afford to buy him out. 17 days since I packed whatever fit into my car and drove away from the only home my daughter Emma had ever known. She was with Daniel now, in that house, sleeping in her own bed, with her stuffed animals and her glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. The custody arrangement was temporary, the lawyer said, just until I got back on my feet, just until I found a place to live, just until I could prove I was stable enough to have my daughter back. Daniel had been smart about it. He'd been planning this for months, maybe years. While I thought we were saving for Emma's college fund, he was hiding money in accounts I didn't know about. While I believed we were partners, he was building a case against me, documenting every time I forgot to pack Emma's lunch or showed up late to pick her up from soccer practice. He painted me as unreliable, unstable, a woman who couldn't manage her own life, let alone care for a child. And the worst part? Some of it was true. I'd lost my job at the marketing firm 6 months before the divorce. Budget cuts, they said. Last hired, first fired. I'd been working there for 3 years, finally feeling like I was building something, contributing to our family's income, proving to Daniel that I was more than just a stay-at-home mom who'd let herself go. But then it was gone, and the job market was brutal. I sent out 87 resumes. I got 4 interviews. I received 0 offers. Daniel grew colder with each rejection letter. I could see the contempt building in his eyes every time I told him I didn't get the position, every time I had to ask him for money to buy groceries, every time I proved his unspoken belief that I was a failure. Marina, the receptionist at my car window, had said the day before, "This is a residential area. You can't park here overnight." She was younger than me, maybe late 20s, wearing a security uniform that looked 2 sizes too big. Her voice was firm but not unkind. I'd nodded, started the engine, and driven to another neighborhood, another street where maybe no one would notice me, report me, ask me to move along like I was garbage that needed to be taken out. I'd been doing this for 12 days. Sleeping in my car, moving from location to location, trying to stay invisible. During the day, I went to the public library where I could use the bathroom, charge my phone, and pretend I was a normal person researching something important instead of a homeless woman with nowhere else to go. I filled out job applications on their computers. I freshened up in their restrooms, using paper towels and hand soap to give myself what I called a sink bath. The librarians never said anything, but I could feel their eyes on me, their pity mixed with discomfort. I ate once a day, usually something from the dollar menu at whatever fast food place was nearest. I'd make it last, eating slowly, savoring each bite because I didn't know when the next meal would come. My bank account had $43.18 in it. My credit cards were maxed out. I'd called my sister Rebecca in Phoenix, but she had her own problems. 3 kids in a 2-bedroom apartment and a husband who'd just been laid off. I'd called my mother, but she'd made it clear years ago that she thought I'd made my bed by marrying Daniel, and now I could lie in it. "Marina," I whispered to myself in that cold car at 3 in the morning, "how did you get here?" But I knew how. I'd gotten here by making myself small, by sacrificing my dreams for someone else's, by believing that being a good wife and mother meant erasing myself completely. I'd gotten here by dropping out of college when I got pregnant with Emma, by putting Daniel's career first, by convincing myself that my ambitions didn't matter as much as keeping the peace. I'd gotten here by losing myself so completely that when the marriage ended, there was nothing left of me to stand on. The knock on my window came on the 13th night. It was sharp, insistent, and it jolted me awake from the shallow sleep I'd finally fallen into. My heart hammered in my chest. This was it, I thought. The police. They were going to arrest me for vagrancy or trespassing or whatever crime it was to be homeless in a nice neighborhood. I sat up, my neck stiff from the awkward angle I'd been sleeping at, and tried to see who was outside. The streetlight illuminated a woman's silhouette. She was tall with short gray hair, wearing a long coat. She knocked again. "Marina? Are you Marina?" Her voice was muffled through the glass but audible. My hands were shaking as I rolled down the window a crack. The cold air rushed in, and I could see her face now. She was older, maybe in her mid-60s, with sharp blue eyes and deep smile lines around her mouth. She wasn't wearing a uniform. She didn't look like police or security. Who's asking? My voice came out hoarse, defensive. My name is Catherine Brennan. I think we need to talk. I don't know you. Not yet. But I knew your grandmother, Ruth Calloway. The name hit me like a slap. My grandmother Ruth had died when I was 8 years old. I barely remembered her, just fragments of memories. Her hands kneading bread dough, her voice singing old folk songs, the way she smelled like lavender and vanilla. She'd lived across the country, and we'd only visited her a handful of times before she passed. What about her? I asked. My guard still up, but my curiosity piqued. Can I buy you breakfast? Catherine said. There's a diner 3 blocks from here. It's open 24 hours. You look like you could use a hot meal and a conversation. I should have said no. I should have driven away right then, chalked it up to some strange encounter and found another place to park. But the mention of my grandmother had stirred something in me, and the promise of a hot meal was too tempting to resist. Fine, I said, but just breakfast. And I'm driving myself. Catherine nodded and stepped back from my car. I watched her walk to a silver SUV parked a few cars down, and I followed her to the diner, my mind racing with questions and suspicions. Who was this woman? How did she know my grandmother? And more importantly, how did she know my name and where to find me? The diner was one of those classic American places with red vinyl booths, checkered floors, and a jukebox in the corner that probably didn't work anymore. At this hour, it was nearly empty, except for a tired-looking waitress and a truck driver, nursing a cup of coffee at the counter. Catherine chose a booth in the back, away from the windows, and I slid in across from her, my body aching from days of sleeping in uncomfortable positions. The waitress came over, and Catherine ordered coffee, eggs, toast, bacon, and hash browns for both of us, without asking me what I wanted. Normally, I would have bristled at someone making decisions for me, but I was too hungry and too tired to care. So, I said once the waitress walked away, you knew my grandmother. Catherine nodded. Ruth and I were very close. Best friends since we were teenagers. We lost touch for a while when she moved to California, but we reconnected in her last years. She talked about you often. Me? I was just a kid when she died. She knew you wouldn't stay a kid. She had a way of seeing people for who they could become, not just who they were at the moment. Catherine paused as the waitress brought our coffee. She wrapped her hands around the mug, and I noticed her fingers were long and elegant, with calluses that suggested she worked with her hands. Your grandmother made me promise something before she died. What kind of promise? She set up a trust fund. For you. It wasn't much at first, but it's been growing for 34 years. Ruth was careful with money, and she invested wisely. She wanted to make sure that if you ever needed it, if you ever found yourself in a situation where you needed a fresh start, the money would be there. I stared at her, my coffee cup frozen halfway to my lips. A trust fund? My grandmother, who I barely remembered, had left me money? Why didn't anyone tell me about this? Your mother was supposed to. Ruth left explicit instructions with her lawyer. She wanted you to know when you turned 25 that there was money set aside for you, for education, for starting a business, for whatever you needed to build the life you wanted. But I suspect your mother never told you. She didn't, I whispered, and suddenly so many things made sense. My mother's bitterness, her insistence that I had made my own choices and had to live with the consequences, her refusal to help me now. She'd known there was money, and she'd kept it from me. Why would she do that? I don't know your mother well enough to answer that, but I know Ruth was worried about it. She made me the secondary trustee just in case. She made me promise that if I ever found out you needed help and hadn't accessed the trust, I would find you and tell you about it. How did you find me? Catherine smiled sadly. I've been looking for you for 3 weeks. I heard about your divorce through a mutual acquaintance, someone who knew Ruth and happened to mention it. When I tried to contact you at your old address, I found out you'd moved. No forwarding information. I hired a private investigator. He tracked you down, found out you'd been sleeping in your car, and gave me the locations where you'd been parking. Part of me was horrified that a stranger had been tracking me, that my homelessness had been documented and reported like I was some kind of case study. But another part of me, the part that had been drowning for so long, felt something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. How much money are we talking about? As of last week, the trust is worth approximately $347,000. I nearly choked on my coffee. That's impossible. It's not. Your grandmother started with $20,000 34 years ago. She invested in index funds, some tech stocks before they exploded, some real estate investment trusts. She was smarter than most people gave her credit for. And she had good advisors. The trust has been growing all this time, waiting for you. The waitress brought our food, and I stared down at the plate of eggs and bacon and toast like it was a mirage. $347,000. It was enough to get an apartment, to hire a lawyer, to fight for custody of Emma, to go back to school, to start over completely. It was enough to stop sleeping in my car, to stop being invisible, to stop being afraid. Why now? I asked, my voice breaking. Why did you wait until I was living in my car to tell me this? I didn't know where you were until now. I've been trying to find you since the day I found out about your divorce. Ruth's lawyer has been trying to contact you for years, sending letters to your last known address, but they all came back. I suspect your mother intercepted them. A hot wave of anger washed over me, but it was quickly replaced by something else. Relief. I wasn't going to die in my car. I wasn't going to lose Emma forever. I wasn't going to disappear into the statistics of failed marriages and lost women. But Catherine's next words stopped me cold. There's a condition. Ruth put it in the trust when she created it. Of course there is, I said, my brief moment of hope crashing down. What's the condition? You have to use the money to build something. Not just survive, but build. She didn't want you to just pay off debts or coast on the money until it ran out. She wanted you to invest in yourself, in your education, in a business, in something that would generate more opportunity, and you have to prove it. Every year, you have to submit a report to the trustee, that's me now, showing how you're using the money to grow and develop. If you don't, the money goes to a charity Ruth designated. I felt my stomach drop. Build something. When I didn't even have a place to sleep. When I hadn't had a job in 6 months. When I could barely drag myself out of bed most mornings because the weight of my failures was so heavy. I can't do that, I whispered. I don't even know where to start. Catherine reached across the table and took my hand. Her grip was firm, warm. Marina, your grandmother believed in you before you were even born. She told me stories about the little girl who asked a million questions, who wanted to understand how everything worked, who dreamed of being an architect and designing buildings that would last for generations. What happened to that girl? She grew up, I said, pulling my hand away. She got pregnant. She got married. She got tired. No, she got scared. There's a difference. I felt tears burning behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. What if I fail? What if I take this money and I waste it and I end up right back here, sleeping in my car? Then at least you'll have tried. At least you'll have fought for yourself instead of just accepting that this is all you deserve. The words hit me harder than any of Daniel's insults ever had. Because she was right. I'd accepted my circumstances like they were inevitable, like I had no power to change them. I'd been so beaten down by my marriage, by my job loss, by my mother's indifference, that I'd forgotten I had any agency at all. What do I need to do? I asked finally, my voice steadier than I felt. First, you need a place to live. Not just a room somewhere, but a real home where Emma can come visit you, where you can start rebuilding your life. Second, you need to figure out what you want to do. What makes you come alive? What did you dream about before life got in the way? Third, you need to start taking steps toward that dream, even if they're small steps, even if it's terrifying. I used to want to be an architect, I said softly. Before Emma, I was in my 3rd year of college, studying architecture. I loved it. I loved designing spaces, thinking about how people move through buildings, how light and structure and function all come together. But then I got pregnant, and Daniel said we couldn't afford for me to finish school, that we needed my income, that I could always go back later. Later never came. It's coming now, Catherine said. If that's what you want. I'm 42 years old. I'd be starting from scratch. Ruth went back to school at 53, got her degree in library science, worked as a librarian until she was 70. She said it was the best decision she ever made because she finally did something for herself. I ate my breakfast slowly, each bite feeling like a small act of defiance against everything that had tried to break me. Catherine told me stories about my grandmother, filling in the gaps of a woman I'd barely known, but who had apparently known me better than I knew myself. Ruth had been married young too, had sacrificed her own dreams for a husband who never appreciated her, had finally left him in her 40s and built a whole new life. She'd been brave in a way I'd never imagined I could be. When we finished eating, Catherine slid a business card across the table. This is my lawyer. Call him tomorrow morning. He'll start the paperwork to give you access to the trust. In the meantime, I want you to stay with me. I have a guest house on my property. It's not big, but it's warm and it has a bed and a shower, and you won't have to sleep in your car anymore. I can't accept that. Yes, you can. And you will. Because you're not just accepting it for yourself, you're accepting it for Emma. You want her back, don't you? Of course I do. Then you need to be stable. You need to be able to show a judge that you have a home, that you have resources, that you're capable of providing for her. Sleeping in your car isn't going to win you custody. She was right, and I knew it. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. Catherine paid for breakfast and led me to her house, which was in a nice neighborhood about 15 minutes from where I'd been parking. The guest house was behind the main residence, a small cottage with a living area, a kitchenette, a bedroom, and a bathroom with a shower that had actual hot water. I stood under that hot water for 20 minutes, washing away 13 days of fear and grime and shame, watching it all swirl down the drain. When I finally got out, I wrapped myself in a towel and looked at my reflection in the mirror. The woman staring back at me was thin, too thin, with dark circles under her eyes and cheekbones that were more prominent than they should be. Her hair was limp and unwashed despite the shower, too damaged from days of neglect. Her eyes looked hollow, defeated. But somewhere in that reflection, I saw a glimpse of the girl I used to be, the one who dreamed of designing beautiful buildings, who believed she could do anything. I'm going to do this, I whispered to my reflection. I'm going to build something. The next morning, I called the lawyer Catherine had recommended. His name was Thomas Hartwell, and he was professional but kind, explaining the trust in detail, walking me through the paperwork I'd need to sign, answering all my questions with patience. He said it would take about a week to process everything, but once it was done, I'd have full access to the funds. During that week, I focused on the basics. I found a therapist who specialized in divorce recovery and trauma. I knew I couldn't move forward if I didn't deal with the emotional wreckage Daniel had left behind, if I didn't address the ways I'd contributed to my own erasure. The sessions were painful, forcing me to confront truths I'd been avoiding for years. But they were also liberating, helping me understand that my worth wasn't tied to Daniel's opinion of me, that I had value beyond being a wife or a mother. I also contacted a family lawyer to start the process of modifying the custody arrangement. She was a sharp woman named Andrea Lopez who didn't sugarcoat the challenges ahead, but who believed I had a strong case once I could demonstrate stability. She advised me to find an apartment quickly, to enroll in some kind of educational program or secure employment, to document everything. When the trust funds became available, my first priority was finding a place to live. I spent 3 days looking at apartments, and I finally found a 2-bedroom unit in a decent neighborhood with good schools. It wasn't fancy, but it had big windows that let in lots of natural light, and I could already imagine Emma's room, how I'd decorate it, how I'd make it feel safe and welcoming. I signed the lease and paid the deposit and the first 3 months' rent up front, and when I got the keys, I sat on the floor of the empty living room and cried. The second priority was school. I contacted the university I'd attended 22 years ago and learned that some of my credits were still valid. I'd need to retake some classes because the curriculum had changed, but I could finish my architecture degree in approximately 2.5 years if I went full-time. The idea terrified me. I'd be one of the oldest students in most of my classes. I'd be rusty, out of practice, competing with people half my age who hadn't had 15-year gaps in their education. But I enrolled anyway. I filled out the paperwork, applied for readmission, registered for fall semester classes. When the acceptance letter came, I pinned it to the refrigerator in my new apartment and looked at it every morning while I drank my coffee. The third priority was Emma. I arranged supervised visitation through the court while the custody modification was pending. The first visit was awkward and painful. Emma was distant, angry, confused about why I'd left, why she couldn't live with me yet, why everything had fallen apart. She was 13 now, old enough to understand that divorce meant her family was broken, but too young to understand the complicated adult reasons behind it. "Mom, why did you leave us?" she asked, her voice small and accusing. "I didn't leave you, sweetheart. I left your father." "There's a difference. But you left the house. You left me there. I had to. The house was in your father's name, and I couldn't afford to stay. But I'm fighting to have you with me as much as possible. I'm getting my life together so we can be a family again, just in a different way. Dad says you're unstable. He says you can't take care of yourself, let alone me." The words stung, but I kept my voice calm. "Your father is angry, and he's saying things to hurt me. But I'm going to prove him wrong. I have an apartment now. I'm going back to school. I'm doing everything I need to do to show the court that I'm a good mother and that you should be with me at least half the time. Why did you and Dad stop loving each other? It was a question I'd been dreading, but I owed her honesty. Sometimes people change, sometimes they grow in different directions. Your father and I wanted different things, and we couldn't figure out how to want the same things anymore. But that has nothing to do with how much we both love you. That never changes. Emma didn't say much after that, but she let me hug her before she left, and that felt like progress. The weeks turned into months. I furnished my apartment slowly, piece by piece, choosing things that felt like me rather than like what Daniel would have approved of. I bought a couch in a deep teal color that he would have hated. I hung art prints of famous buildings on the walls, Frank Lloyd Wright's Falling Water, Zaha Hadid's flowing structures, the clean lines of Bauhaus architecture. I created a workspace by the window where I could study and draft designs, where morning light would stream in and make me feel hopeful about the day ahead. Each purchase felt like a small act of rebellion, a declaration that this space was mine and mine alone. The first time Emma came to stay in the new apartment, she walked through every room carefully, touching the walls, opening cabinets, testing the couch cushions like she was searching for something. "It's so quiet here," she said finally, standing in the middle of the living room. At Dad's house, Kelly's always playing music or talking on the phone. Kelly was Daniel's new girlfriend, and from what Emma had told me, she'd moved in almost immediately after the divorce was finalized. "Do you like it? The quiet, I mean." She thought about it for a long moment, her face serious. "Yeah, I think I do. It feels peaceful, like I can actually breathe." We spent that weekend cooking together, something we'd rarely done at the old house where Daniel had strict rules about kitchen messes and meal times and proper nutrition. We made chocolate chip cookies from scratch and got flour absolutely everywhere, white powder coating the counters and somehow even ending up in our hair. We laughed when the first batch burned because we were too busy talking about her soccer team drama to notice the timer going off. We ate ice cream straight from the container while watching old romantic comedies that made us both cry happy tears. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours, and that made it beautiful. School was harder than I'd anticipated. The software had changed completely since my college days. Programs like AutoCAD and Revit and SketchUp that my classmates navigated with ease felt like foreign languages to me, all these commands and shortcuts and rendering techniques that everyone else seemed to absorb effortlessly. I spent hours watching tutorial videos on YouTube, my eyes burning from screen fatigue, staying late in the computer lab until security had to kick me out, asking for help from students half my age who were mostly kind enough to show me shortcuts and techniques, though I could see the pity in their eyes. My classmates were mostly in their early 20s, confident and tech-savvy in ways I wasn't. They wore expensive designer clothes and talked about internships at prestigious firms and seemed to have unlimited financial support from their parents. They spoke a language I didn't fully understand, casually referencing architects and design movements I'd never heard of, debating postmodern theory versus parametric design with an ease that made me feel hopelessly out of touch. In group projects, I often felt like the weak link, the one holding everyone back while I struggled to learn software they'd been using since high school. There was one student in particular, a young man named Tyler Harrison from a wealthy family in Connecticut, who seemed to take pleasure in pointing out my deficiencies. He was talented, I had to admit, with an eye for dramatic forms and bold gestures, but he was also cruel in that casual way that privileged people often are, not even realizing the impact of their words. In our design studio class, he'd make comments just loud enough for others to hear, but soft enough to maintain deniability. Maybe if we had someone who actually understood contemporary architecture on this team, or I guess not everyone is comfortable with technology. Once, when I presented a design that emphasized accessibility and community gathering spaces, he'd smirked and said, "Very practical, Marina. Almost like you're designing a community center instead of real architecture." His words stung, reminding me of Daniel's contempt, of all the ways I'd been told I wasn't good enough, wasn't smart enough, wasn't worth the space I took up in the world. Some nights I'd lie awake wondering if he was right, if I was fooling myself thinking I could do this, if I should just drop out and save everyone the trouble of watching me fail. One day, after Tyler had made another cutting remark about my preliminary sketches being too traditional, too safe, too boring, I stayed after class, fighting back tears of frustration and rage. I was gathering my materials, my hands shaking, when Dr. Sarah Chen, who specialized in sustainable design and taught our studio class, approached me. She was a small woman in her 50s with sharp eyes behind trendy glasses and a reputation for being both brilliant and demanding. "Marina, can we talk for a minute?" I nodded, not trusting my voice, terrified that she was going to tell me I wasn't cut out for this program. I've been watching you in class. I see how hard you're working, how much effort you're putting in. I see you here late at night when I'm leaving. I see the frustration on your face when the software doesn't do what you want it to do. But I also see something else. Her voice was gentle but firm, the voice of someone who knew what it was like to fight for a place in a male-dominated field. I see that you're letting people like Tyler get to you. Can I tell you something? Tyler is talented, there's no question about that. But he's also arrogant and insecure. He tears others down because he's terrified of his own inadequacy. His father is a famous architect, and Tyler lives in constant fear that he'll never measure up. Don't let him define your worth or your work. It's just hard, I admitted, my voice cracking. Everyone else seems so confident, so sure of themselves. They know all these references and theories, and they can make the computer do exactly what they want. I feel like I'm constantly playing catch-up, like I don't belong here. You are playing catch-up, technically speaking. That's just reality. But Marina, you also bring something to the table that most of these kids don't have and may never develop. Life experience, empathy, an understanding of how real people live in real spaces, not just how buildings look in glossy architecture magazines. Your designs aren't just aesthetically interesting, they're thoughtful, deeply considerate of the actual needs of the people who will use them. That's rare, even among experienced architects. Most architects design for other architects, for magazine spreads and awards. You design for people. Don't lose that. I wanted to tell you that your work is exceptional, she continued, sitting down on the desk edge and looking at me directly. You have a maturity in your approach that's rare in students, even graduate students. Tyler can make flashy forms, but can he design a space where a single mother feels safe walking home at night? Can he create an affordable housing unit that doesn't feel like a prison cell? Can he think about how a person in a wheelchair experiences a building? These are the questions you ask naturally, and they're the most important questions in architecture. Have you thought about what you want to specialize in? She asked. I haven't gotten that far yet. I'm just trying to survive each semester to get through the program without failing out. Well, start thinking about it seriously, because you have real talent, and I'd hate to see you waste it by not having a clear direction. Have you considered focusing on social architecture, housing design, community development? You have insights that could make a real difference in those fields. Real impact on people's lives. That's worth more than any flashy museum design that wins awards but doesn't serve actual human needs. Her words planted a seed that would grow over the coming months. I started researching different specializations in architecture, exploring areas I'd never considered before. I spent hours in the library reading about the history of public housing, about the failures of urban renewal projects that destroyed communities in the name of progress, about innovative architects who were designing affordable housing that was beautiful and dignified. I became fascinated by adaptive reuse, the practice of taking old buildings and repurposing them for new functions. There was something poetic about it, taking something that seemed finished, used up, destined for demolition, and giving it new life, new purpose. I saw myself in those buildings, saw my own transformation reflected in their resurrection. I also dove deep into research about affordable housing, about the ways architecture could either support or harm vulnerable populations, about the intersection of design and social justice. I learned about how public housing projects in the 50s and 60s had isolated poor families in high-rise towers with no community spaces, no natural light, no consideration for human dignity. I learned about how gentrification displaced communities under the guise of revitalization. I learned about architects who were trying to do better, to create housing that was both affordable and beautiful, functional and dignified. I started forming a study group with 3 other students who were struggling with the same technical challenges I faced. There was Jessica Park, a single mother in her 30s who was pursuing architecture after spending years as a graphic designer, bringing artistic sensibility but needing to develop technical skills. There was Marcus Thompson, a Black man who'd served 2 tours in Iraq before coming to college, bringing a practical problem-solving approach and incredible spatial reasoning but struggling with the theoretical discussions. And there was Anita Rodriguez, who'd immigrated from Mexico as a teenager with her family, who wanted to design community spaces that served immigrant populations, who understood what it meant to feel unwelcome in the spaces you occupied. We met twice a week at the library, usually late at night when it was quiet, helping each other with software tutorials, critiquing each other's work with honesty and kindness, supporting each other through the stress and self-doubt that came with being older students in a program designed for privileged 20-year-olds, fresh out of undergraduate programs. We shared cheap pizza and cheaper coffee, vending machine snacks and stories from our lives outside of architecture school. These people became my lifeline. They understood what it was like to be older students, to have responsibilities and histories and scars that the younger students didn't carry. We didn't just talk about architecture, we talked about life. Jessica shared her guilt about leaving her 2 young kids with a babysitter 3 nights a week while she pursued her dreams, about her ex-husband who called her selfish for going back to school. Marcus talked about the nightmares from his deployment that still woke him up at night, about using architecture as a way to create order and beauty in a world that had shown him so much chaos and destruction. Anita talked about her undocumented parents who worked 2 jobs each, cleaning offices at night and doing landscaping during the day, to support her education, about the pressure she felt to succeed for their sake. And I talked about sleeping in my car, about the 13 nights when I didn't know if I'd ever have a home again, about fighting for custody of Emma, about rebuilding my life from absolutely nothing but a trust fund from a grandmother I barely remembered. I talked about Daniel's betrayal, about the years I'd spent making myself smaller and smaller until I'd nearly disappeared, about learning to take up space again, to believe I deserved to exist in the world. "You're the bravest person I know," Jessica said to me one night when I was particularly discouraged after receiving harsh criticism from a visiting critic who'd called my housing project too earnest, too focused on social issues instead of architectural innovation. "You lost everything, and you're still here, still fighting, still creating. You could have given up 100 times, but you didn't. That takes guts." Her words, and the solidarity of that small group, kept me going through the brutal first year and into the second. 6 months after Catherine had knocked on my car window, I had my first major custody hearing. Andrea had prepared me thoroughly, coaching me on what to say, how to present myself, what documentation to bring. We met multiple times in her office, running through possible questions, preparing for Daniel's attacks. She'd warned me that his lawyer, a shark named Gregory Winters who specialized in high-conflict divorces, would try to paint me as unstable, irresponsible, unfit to parent. "Wear conservative clothes," Andrea advised. "Nothing too expensive that might suggest you're frivolous with money, but nothing too cheap that suggests you can't provide for Emma. Speak clearly and calmly, even if they provoke you. Don't show anger, don't show emotion, just show that you're stable and capable." Judges don't like drama. The courthouse was intimidating, all marble floors and high ceilings and an atmosphere of cold judgment. I wore a navy blue dress that Catherine had helped me pick out, modest and professional. My hands were shaking as we entered the courtroom, and I had to clasp them together to keep anyone from noticing. Daniel was already there with Gregory Winters, both of them looking confident and comfortable, like they owned the space. Daniel wouldn't look at me directly, keeping his eyes forward or on his lawyer, and I realized that to him, I'd become just an obstacle, a problem to be solved, not a person he'd once loved or at least claimed to love. The judge was a stern woman in her 60s named Judge Patricia Harrington, who listened to both sides without showing much emotion. Daniel's lawyer went first, painting a picture of me that I barely recognized. He brought up my job loss, emphasizing that I'd been unemployed for 6 months before the divorce. He mentioned my homelessness, though he called it my choice to live in my vehicle, making it sound like some kind of lifestyle decision rather than desperation. He talked about my late arrivals to pick Emma up from activities, my forgotten permission slips, my failure to maintain stability during the marriage. "Mrs. Wallace has shown a pattern of unreliability," Gregory Winters said, his voice smooth and confident. "She lost her job due to performance issues, then failed to secure employment for months. She chose to leave the family home, leaving her daughter behind. She's been sleeping in her car, Your Honor. What kind of environment is that for a child? My client is concerned that Mrs. Wallace is not currently capable of providing the stable, secure home that Emma needs. He's asking the court to maintain primary custody with supervised visitation only until such time as Mrs. Wallace can demonstrate true stability." Each word felt like a knife. The performance issues claim was a lie. I'd been laid off due to budget cuts. The choice to leave was false. I'd had no option when the house was in Daniel's name, and I couldn't afford to buy him out. But lies told in court with confidence have a way of sounding like truth. Then it was Andrea's turn. She countered methodically, presenting evidence of everything I'd accomplished in 6 months. She showed my lease agreement for a stable 2-bedroom apartment in a good school district. She presented my acceptance letter to the architecture program. She provided character references from professors who attested to my dedication and responsibility. She showed records of every supervised visitation, all of which I'd attended on time and engaged fully with Emma. She brought up Catherine as a character witness, and Catherine testified about the trust fund, about my grandmother's faith in me, about the progress I'd made. Your Honor, Andrea said firmly, Mr. Wallace's attorney is painting a picture of a woman who doesn't exist anymore. Yes, Mrs. Wallace went through a difficult period. She lost her job, went through a devastating divorce, and experienced temporary homelessness. But look at what she's done since then. In 6 months, she's secured housing, enrolled in school, started therapy to address the trauma of her marriage and divorce, and maintained consistent, loving contact with her daughter. She's not asking to uproot Emma from her school or her community. She's asking for joint custody, for the opportunity to be a real parent again, not just a supervised visitor. Emma needs her mother, Your Honor, and her mother is ready, willing, and able to provide for her. Then Daniel took the stand, and I had to sit there while he spoke calmly about his concerns for our daughter. He made himself sound reasonable, worried, just a father trying to protect his child. He talked about my depression during the marriage, which I'd hidden from everyone but him. He mentioned times I'd stayed in bed all day, unable to function, though he failed to mention that those days came after particularly cruel fights, after he'd spent hours telling me I was worthless. I just want what's best for Emma, he said, looking directly at the judge with practiced sincerity. I love her mother. I always will. But I don't think Marina is ready for the responsibility of joint custody. Maybe in another year, when she's further along in her recovery and her schooling. But right now, I think it would be destabilizing for Emma. When I took the stand, my voice shook at first, but I forced myself to speak clearly. I told the judge about my architecture program, about my apartment, about my plans for the future. I acknowledged my struggles, but emphasized my progress. I talked about Emma, about how much I missed her, about how I wanted to be present for her soccer games and school plays and everyday moments, not just supervise 2-hour visits in a neutral location. Your Honor, I said, looking directly at Judge Harrington, I made mistakes during my marriage. I let myself become depressed and lost. But I'm not that person anymore. I've spent 6 months doing the hard work of rebuilding my life, not just for myself, but for my daughter. Emma needs to see that it's possible to fall down and get back up, that women don't have to stay in situations that diminish them. I'm asking for the chance to parent my daughter, to show her what resilience looks like, to be present in her life in a meaningful way. Judge Harrington listened to everything, occasionally making notes, her face giving away nothing. The silence after the testimonies felt endless, heavy with judgment. When she finally spoke, her voice was measured but firm. Mr. Wallace, your attempts to portray your ex-wife as unfit are not supported by the current evidence. While Mrs. Wallace certainly went through a difficult period, she has demonstrated significant initiative in rebuilding her life and has maintained appropriate, loving contact with the minor child. The court is not in the business of punishing people for temporary hardships, particularly when those hardships were largely outside their control. What matters is what Mrs. Wallace has done since then, and the evidence shows consistent progress. She looked at both of us sternly. I'm modifying the custody arrangement to joint custody with a 50-50 split, alternating weeks, effective immediately. Both parents will share decision-making responsibilities for the child's education, healthcare, and general welfare. This court expects both of you to communicate respectfully, to put your daughter's needs ahead of your personal conflicts, and to recognize that Emma benefits from having both parents actively involved in her life. Mr. Wallace, I want to be clear. Attempting to alienate your daughter from her mother or undermining Mrs. Wallace's parenting will not be viewed favorably by this court. Mrs. Wallace, I expect you to maintain the stability you've demonstrated these past 6 months. Am I clear to both of you? Yes, Your Honor, we both said, though Daniel's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. As we left the courtroom, I saw Daniel's face go red with fury. In the hallway, away from the judge, he pulled me aside roughly. You think you've won? He hissed. You think this is over? I'm going to make your life hell, Marina. Every chance I get, I'm going to document every little mistake you make, every time you're 5 minutes late, every time Emma comes back from your place with a complaint. I will prove you're unfit. Let go of my arm, I said quietly but firmly. We're done here. Andrea pulled me away before the confrontation could escalate, but Daniel's threats echoed in my head for days afterward. When I told Emma the news, picking her up for our first official week of joint custody, she had a complicated reaction. She cried, but they were tears I couldn't quite read, a mixture of happiness and sadness and confusion and maybe relief. I missed you, Mom, she whispered, hugging me tight in the parking lot of Daniel's house. I missed you so much, and I was so scared I'd never get to live with you again. I missed you too, baby. So much. Every single day. But then, as we drove to my apartment, she went quiet, staring out the window. Finally, she said, "Dad told me you didn't really want me. He said you chose school over me, that you could have fought for me harder from the beginning." The words landed like a punch. "Emma, look at me." She turned, her eyes red and suspicious. "That is not true. I have been fighting for you every single day since the divorce. Every decision I've made, every hard thing I've done, has been about building a life where we can be together. Your father is angry and he's saying things to hurt me. But more importantly, he's hurting you by putting you in the middle of our conflict. You are wanted. You are loved. You are the most important thing in my life, and nothing will ever change that." "Then why did you leave?" she demanded, her voice breaking. "Why did you leave me there with him?" "Because I had no choice. The house was in his name and I couldn't afford to stay. And the custody arrangement was temporary, just until I could prove I was stable. I know it felt like abandonment, and I'm sorry for that. But I never stopped fighting to get you back. Never." She was quiet for a long time, processing. When we got to the apartment, she went straight to her room, the room I'd carefully decorated with her favorite colors, with space for her soccer trophies and her artwork and all the things that made her feel at home. She closed the door, and I gave her space, understanding that this transition was hard, that she needed time to adjust. Over the next few months, having Emma back in my life, even part-time, changed everything. It wasn't always easy. She brought her energy and her mess and her teenage drama into my carefully organized apartment, leaving clothes on the floor and dishes in the sink and testing boundaries at every opportunity. We fought about homework and curfews and phone time. She played her music too loud, stayed up too late texting friends, rolled her eyes at my suggestions with the particular disdain that only teenagers can muster. But it also felt like home in a way it hadn't before. We established new routines together. Thursday night became cooking night, where we'd try a new recipe together, usually with disastrous but hilarious results. The time we tried to make homemade pasta and ended up with dough stuck to every surface, including the ceiling. The time we attempted a soufflé that deflated so dramatically, we took a photo and captioned it "My Self-Esteem." Saturday mornings were farmers market runs, followed by breakfast at our favorite cafe, a little place called Sunrise Corner, that made the best blueberry pancakes and knew our order by heart. Sunday evenings were homework sessions where I'd work on my architecture projects while she did her algebra and history essays, both of us complaining about our respective assignments but supporting each other through them. She met Catherine, who became like the grandmother she'd never really known. Catherine would come over for dinner once a week, bringing stories and wisdom and an unconditional love that Emma soaked up. Catherine told Emma stories about Ruth, about her strength and resilience, about how she'd reinvented herself after leaving an unhappy marriage, about how she'd lived boldly and bravely until the end of her life. Emma absorbed these stories like they were lifelines, understanding that the women in her family didn't give up, even when things got impossibly hard, that there was a legacy of strength she could draw on. But Emma was also struggling in ways I didn't initially recognize. Her grades started slipping in her 8th grade year. She became withdrawn, spending hours in her room with the door closed. She stopped talking about her friends, stopped mentioning soccer practice, stopped engaging with the world around her. At first, I thought it was typical teenage moodiness, but then her teacher called me with concerns. "Emma's been falling asleep in class, Mrs. Wallace. Her last 3 assignments have been late or incomplete. And socially, she seems isolated. The other students have noticed. I'm wondering if everything is okay at home." I had a sinking feeling in my stomach. "I'll talk to her." That night, I knocked on Emma's door. "Can we talk, sweetie?" "I'm tired, Mom." "I know, but this is important." I came in and sat on the edge of her bed. Emma looked up at me with eyes that were red-rimmed and exhausted. "Your teacher called. She's worried about you." "I'm worried about you." "What's going on?" "Nothing. I'm just tired." "Emma, you can tell me anything. You know that, right?" She was quiet for a long time, picking at her bedspread. Finally, in a small voice, she said, "The kids at school found out about you. About you sleeping in your car. Someone's older brother saw you parked on their street that one night, and he told people, and now everyone knows. They call me homeless girl's daughter. They say stuff about you, about us. Mean stuff. My heart broke. Oh, Emma, I'm so sorry. What are they saying? That you're a loser, that you couldn't keep it together, that we're poor, that I'm going to end up just like you." She started crying. "I tried to defend you, Mom. I really did. But then they just made fun of me more, so I stopped talking to everyone. It's easier to be alone." I pulled her into my arms, holding her while she sobbed. "Baby, listen to me. What I went through, sleeping in my car, that was one of the hardest times in my life. But it doesn't define me, and it certainly doesn't define you. Those kids who are making fun of us, they've never had to struggle for anything. They don't know what real strength looks like. You come from a line of strong women who survive, who rebuild, who refuse to stay down. That's nothing to be ashamed of, but you don't have to go to school there and face them every day. You're right, I don't, and I'm sorry that my struggles have affected you. That's not fair, and I wish I could protect you from it, but I can't. What I can do is show you that people who judge us, who try to make us feel small, they don't get to win. We win by living our lives, by being proud of who we are and what we've overcome. How do you do that? How do you not care what people think? Oh, I care. I care a lot, but I've learned that what I think about myself matters more. Those kids at school, they'll forget about this in a month when something new comes along to gossip about. But you and I, we're building something real. We're building a life that has meaning and purpose. That's worth more than their approval. We started family therapy after that, both of us together, working through the trauma of the divorce and its aftermath. Emma needed a space to express her anger, her fear, her confusion about our broken family. And I needed to hear it, to understand how my choices had affected her, to learn how to parent through crisis. My second year of school was both easier and harder in ways I hadn't expected. Easier because I'd found my rhythm, understood what professors expected, had built relationships with classmates like Jessica, Marcus, and Anita who genuinely supported me. I'd mastered the software basics, could navigate AutoCAD and Revit with reasonable competence, had developed a workflow that worked for my learning style. The imposter syndrome was still there, whispering that I didn't belong, but it was quieter now, easier to ignore. Harder because the projects became exponentially more complex, the expectations higher, the competition fiercer. We weren't just designing hypothetical buildings anymore. We were tackling real-world problems with constraints like zoning laws, building codes, budget limitations, community needs, environmental impact. The margin for error felt smaller, the stakes higher. Every project felt like it could make or break my portfolio, determine my future in the field. I was in a design studio course taught by both Dr. Chen and a visiting professor named Marcus Liu, who'd won multiple awards for his community-focused architecture firm in San Francisco. The semester project was ambitious. We were tasked with creating a proposal for a community center in Riverside, an underserved neighborhood on the east side of the city that had been systematically neglected for decades. The area had high unemployment, failing schools, food deserts, and virtually no public gathering spaces. Our designs needed to address real community needs while being financially feasible and architecturally significant. It was the kind of project that could make or break a student's portfolio, the kind that firms would look at during interviews, the kind that mattered beyond just a grade. I threw myself into it completely, obsessively. I spent 3 weeks just on research before I drew a single line. I went to Riverside multiple times, walking the streets at different times of day, observing how people moved through space, where they gathered, what was missing. I interviewed residents at the local bodega, at the bus stop, at the elementary school during pickup time. I talked to single mothers like Jessica, to veterans like Marcus, to immigrants like Anita's family. I asked them what they needed, what they dreamed of, what would make their lives better. What emerged from those conversations was heartbreaking and inspiring. People wanted safe spaces for their kids after school, places where teenagers could go instead of the streets. They wanted job training programs, computer access, help with resumes and applications. They wanted community gardens where they could grow fresh food in a neighborhood where the closest grocery store was 3 bus transfers away. They wanted a commercial kitchen where local entrepreneurs could start food businesses. They wanted spaces for ESL classes, for GED programs, for community meetings. They wanted beauty and dignity in a neighborhood that had been told for decades that it wasn't worth investing in. I designed a building that tried to honor all of those needs. It was 3 stories, built around a central courtyard with a community garden. The ground floor had flexible community rooms that could host everything from job fairs to birthday parties, a teaching kitchen with commercial-grade equipment, a library and computer lab with free internet access. The second floor had classrooms for adult education programs, tutoring spaces for kids, quiet study areas. The third floor had a gym and a rooftop garden with views of the city skyline, a reminder that this neighborhood was part of something larger, that its residents deserved beauty and possibility. I incorporated sustainable features because heating and cooling costs would affect the center's operating budget. Solar panels on the roof, passive cooling through strategic window placement, rainwater collection for the gardens. I used materials that were durable and low maintenance, but also warm and welcoming. Lots of natural wood and large windows that brought in light. I created spaces that were flexible, that could adapt to changing community needs over time. I thought about accessibility in every detail. Ramps that didn't feel like afterthoughts, doorways wide enough for wheelchairs, bathrooms that accommodated different abilities, signage in multiple languages. I worked on it obsessively, often until 2 or 3 in the morning, driven by something I couldn't quite name but that felt bigger than just a grade or a portfolio piece. This project meant something. It was about the kind of architecture I wanted to create, the kind of architect I wanted to become. It was about proving to myself and to others that design could serve people, not just ego or commerce, that buildings could heal communities instead of harming them. Emma complained that I was too busy, that I was always working, and she was right. One night she came into my workspace around midnight and found me surrounded by drawings and models and reference books, still working on material specifications. "Mom, you need to sleep. You've been working for like 8 hours straight." "I know, baby. I just need to finish this section." She sat down across from me, her face serious. "Is this project more important than me?" The question hit me like cold water. What? No. Of course not. Then why do you spend more time with it than with me? I put down my pencil and really looked at her, seeing the hurt in her eyes. "You're right. I've been so focused on this project that I haven't been present with you. I'm sorry. That's not okay. Dad says you're obsessed. He says you're neglecting me, just like you used to neglect everything." I felt anger rise up, anger at Daniel for continuing to undermine me, but I pushed it down. "Your father doesn't know what I'm doing or why, but you deserve an explanation. This project, this community center, it's not just about a grade. It's about designing something that could actually help people who are struggling the way I struggled. But you're right that I've let the balance get out of whack. You're my priority, always. This project is temporary. You're forever. We made a deal that night. I would set clearer boundaries around work time, would be fully present during our evenings together, would stop bringing my laptop to the dinner table, and she would tell me when she felt neglected instead of bottling it up and telling Daniel, who only used it as ammunition against me. When it came time to present the community center project, I was terrified. My hands shook as I stood in front of the review panel, which included Dr. Chen, Professor Liu, several other faculty members, and 2 practicing architects from the community. One was Robert Kimura, who owned a respected firm specializing in civic buildings, and the other was Linda Reeves, who'd designed multiple award-winning schools and libraries in underserved areas. I had to present not just my design, but my process, my research, my reasoning behind every choice. I talked them through my community interviews, showing quotes and photos from residents. I explained how I'd organized the spaces based on actual needs, not assumptions. I showed my drawings and models and renderings, walking them through a typical day at the center, describing how different people would use different spaces, how the building would serve the community from early morning to late evening. The questioning was intense. Professor Liu challenged my material choices, asking if I'd really costed them out, or if I was just assuming they'd fit in a limited budget. Dr. Chen pushed me on the sustainability features, asking for specific data on energy savings. Linda Reeves questioned my space allocation, wondering if I'd devoted too much square footage to the garden and not enough to indoor programming. But I'd done my homework. I'd gotten quotes from suppliers, run energy calculations, analyzed similar community centers to understand space needs. I defended my choices not with ego, but with evidence, with empathy, with a clear vision of who this building was meant to serve. When I finished, there was a long silence that felt eternal. I stood there, my heart pounding, waiting for their verdict. Then Robert Kimura spoke up, leaning forward in his chair. "This is remarkable work. The level of detail, the community engagement, the thoughtfulness of the design, the integration of function and beauty. This isn't student work. This is professional-level architecture. More than that, it's architecture that actually gives a damn about people, which is rarer than it should be." "I agree, Doctor," Chen added, smiling at me with what looked like pride. "Marina, you've created something genuinely special here. This project demonstrates not just technical competence, but a depth of empathy and understanding that we rarely see. I'd like to submit this project to the Regional Design Innovation Competition. It's a prestigious competition for sustainable community design, and I think you have a real shot at recognition, if you're willing." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. "Yes, I'd like that." Linda Reeves added, "I run a nonprofit that actually funds community centers like this. I'd like to talk to you about whether we might be able to make this a reality, not just a proposal." Would you be open to that? Again, I could only nod, overwhelmed by the validation, by the possibility that something I'd designed might actually get built, might actually serve the community I'd come to care about through my research. Tyler Harrison, who'd been in the audience, left the presentation without speaking to me, his face tight with something that looked like jealousy or anger, or maybe just the discomfort of seeing someone he'd underestimated succeed. That night, I called Catherine to tell her about the presentation. She listened to the whole story, and when I finished, she said, "Ruth would be so proud of you. Not just because you designed something beautiful, but because you designed something that serves people who need it. People like you used to be." That's what she hoped you'd do with her gift. Build something that mattered. 3 months later, I won 3rd place in the Regional Design Innovation Competition. It came with a small cash prize of $5,000 and, more importantly, recognition. My name was in the industry newsletter. Architecture blogs wrote about my project, praising its community-centered approach. I had something concrete to put on my resume, something that proved I wasn't just a student struggling to catch up, but a designer with a voice and vision worth paying attention to. Robert Kimura reached out personally to ask if I'd be interested in an internship at his firm the following summer. It would be paid, professional experience working on real civic projects. The opportunity felt surreal, like a door opening that I'd never imagined I'd be allowed to walk through. Everything I'd been building was starting to solidify into something real, something I could hold on to, something that felt like a future I'd created for myself. But success brought its own challenges. Daniel grew more hostile as my life improved, as if my happiness was a personal affront to him. He started being difficult about the custody schedule, claiming I was prioritizing school over Emma, questioning my choices, trying to undermine my confidence. Emma was caught in the middle, and I could see the stress taking its toll on her. One night, about 18 months after Catherine had found me, Emma came to my apartment for her week with me and went straight to her room without speaking. I gave her some space, but after an hour I knocked on her door. "Can I come in?" "Whatever." I found her lying on her bed, staring at the ceiling, her face blotchy from crying. I sat down beside her. "What happened?" "Dad and Kelly were fighting." "She's his girlfriend," Emma said bitterly. "She lives there now. She acts like she's my mother, telling me what to do, how to behave. And when I told her she wasn't my mom, Dad took her side. He said I was being disrespectful and that I needed to accept his new relationship." I took a deep breath, fighting back my own anger at Daniel. That must have been really hard. Why does everything have to change? Why can't things just go back to the way they were? Because the way things were wasn't working, baby. Your father and I weren't happy. We were hurting each other, even if you didn't see it. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let something end so that something new can begin. But I didn't get a choice. You and Dad decided to get divorced, and I just had to deal with it. You're right. You didn't get a choice about the divorce, but you do get a choice about how you move forward. You can stay angry and let it poison everything, or you can accept that life is different now and find new ways to be happy. "Are you happy?" she asked, turning to look at me. I thought about it carefully. I'm happier than I've been in a long time. I'm scared sometimes, and it's hard, and I miss the person I thought your father was. But I'm building a life that's mine, doing work I love, becoming the person I always wanted to be. So yes, I think I am happy. Do you think I can be happy too? Even with everything being so messed up, I think you can be anything you want to be, and I think you're stronger than you know. You come from a long line of strong women who figured out how to survive and thrive even when life tried to break them. Tell me about Great-Grandma Ruth again. I told her the stories Catherine had told me, about Ruth leaving her unhappy marriage, going back to school, becoming a librarian, traveling to places she'd always wanted to see, living on her own terms. I told her about how Ruth had set up a trust fund for me because she believed I'd need it someday, how she'd seen the potential in me before I could see it myself. "Do you think she'd be proud of you?" Emma asked. "I hope so. I'm trying to live up to the faith she had in me. I think she would be. And I'm proud of you too, Mom, even though it's hard sometimes." We held each other in the growing darkness, and I felt something shift between us, a new understanding, a new kind of relationship that was more honest and more resilient than what we'd had before. My final year of school was a whirlwind. I took on a thesis project that combined my interest in adaptive reuse with my passion for community development. I proposed converting an old textile factory in a declining neighborhood into mixed-use space with affordable housing, artist studios, and ground-floor retail. It was ambitious, maybe too ambitious, but Robert Kimura had agreed to serve as my thesis advisor, and his guidance was invaluable. I worked harder than I'd ever worked in my life. I spent countless hours on site surveys, zoning research, structural analysis, design iterations. I neglected sleep, lived on coffee and determination. Emma complained that I was too busy, that I was always working, and she was right. I had to learn to balance my ambition with my responsibilities, to recognize that success meant nothing if I lost my daughter in the pursuit of it. Catherine helped with this too, reminding me that Ruth's gift wasn't just the money but the wisdom behind it. Build something, yes, but don't sacrifice everything else in the process. Life was about balance, about knowing when to push and when to rest, when to focus on career and when to focus on family. I graduated with honors on a warm May afternoon, 3 years after Catherine had knocked on my car window. Emma was there, screaming and cheering when my name was called. Catherine was there, tears streaming down her face. My sister Rebecca flew in from Phoenix with her kids, and even my mother came, though she sat in the back and left quickly after the ceremony without speaking to me. That hurt, but I'd learned that I couldn't control other people's reactions, only my own responses to them. Robert offered me a full-time position at his firm immediately after graduation. The salary wasn't huge, but it was enough to live on comfortably, to continue building my life, to start paying forward some of what Catherine and Ruth had given me. My first project was assisting on the design for a new elementary school, and I poured everything I'd learned into creating spaces that would inspire and support children's learning. But the project I was most excited about was one I'd taken on independently. I'd been working with a nonprofit that provided services to homeless women, and I'd proposed designing a transitional housing facility for them, a place that would offer not just shelter but dignity, privacy, and support services to help women get back on their feet. It was personal, of course. I knew what it felt like to sleep in your car, to feel invisible, to believe you'd fallen too far to ever climb back up. I'm doing this for free, I told the nonprofit's director, a woman named Jennifer Martinez who dedicated her life to this work. But I want to do it right. I want to create something that treats these women like human beings who deserve beautiful, functional spaces, not like problems to be warehoused. That's exactly what we need, Jennifer said. Most architects who work on affordable housing or homeless services treat it like a box-checking exercise. They create these institutional spaces that feel more like prisons than homes. We need someone who understands what these women are going through, who can design with empathy. The project took 2 years from concept to completion, and it was the hardest and most rewarding work I'd ever done. I met with dozens of women who'd experienced homelessness, listening to their stories, understanding their needs. I designed private sleeping quarters instead of dormitory-style rooms because I'd learned how important privacy was when everything else had been stripped away. I created communal spaces that felt warm and inviting, places where women could cook together, share meals, support each other. I incorporated natural light everywhere because I remembered how the darkness of my car had felt suffocating, how I'd craved sunlight like a plant dying of drought. When the facility opened, I was there for the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Jennifer gave a speech about the importance of treating homeless women with dignity, about how the design of the building reflected that mission. Then she asked me to say a few words. I stood in front of the crowd, looking at the building I'd created, and I thought about the woman I'd been 5 years ago, sleeping in her car, believing she had nothing left to offer the world. I thought about Catherine knocking on my window, about my grandmother Ruth believing in a future for me that I couldn't see, about Emma learning to be strong and resilient despite everything. 5 years ago, I started, my voice shaking slightly. I was homeless. I slept in my car for almost 2 weeks. I thought my life was over, that I'd failed at everything that mattered. I felt invisible, worthless, like I'd fallen through the cracks and nobody cared. Then someone saw me. Someone believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. Someone gave me the resources and the support I needed to rebuild my life. This building exists because I know what it's like to need that kind of help. And I hope that every woman who comes through these doors feels seen, valued, and capable of building a life beyond anything she can currently imagine. The applause was loud and long, but what I remembered most was the woman who approached me afterward, a young woman in her 20s with a baby on her hip and exhaustion in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for making this place. Thank you for understanding." That moment, more than any award or recognition or professional success, validated everything I'd worked for. Emma graduated from high school that same year. She'd grown into a remarkable young woman, strong and independent and compassionate. She'd watched me rebuild my life from nothing, and she'd learned that failure wasn't permanent, that you could fall down and get back up, that your worth wasn't determined by your worst moments. She was planning to study social work in college, inspired by the women we'd met through the transitional housing project, determined to help others the way we'd been helped. The day before she left for college, we sat on my apartment balcony, watching the sunset, and she said, "Mom, I need to tell you something. When you and Dad first got divorced, I blamed you. I thought you destroyed our family. I was so angry at you for leaving. I know, baby, I could tell, but I get it now. I see what you built after the divorce. I see how much happier you are, and I see what you've done for other people. You turned the worst thing that ever happened to you into something beautiful. That's not failure. That's courage." I hugged her tight, trying not to cry and failing completely. "Your great-grandma Ruth would be so proud of you. And so am I." After Emma left for school, I had to figure out who I was as a woman whose identity wasn't primarily tied to being a mother. It was disorienting at first, the quiet apartment, the lack of someone needing me constantly, but it was also liberating. I threw myself deeper into my work, taking on more challenging projects, mentoring younger architects at the firm, speaking at conferences about designing with empathy and community engagement. Catherine and I remained close, meeting for lunch every few weeks, talking about life and architecture, and the peculiar gift Ruth had given both of us, a belief that people could reinvent themselves at any age, that it was never too late to become who you were meant to be. Catherine was in her 70s now, slowing down a bit but still sharp and engaged with the world. One afternoon, about 7 years after she'd found me, we were having lunch at our favorite restaurant when she said, "I have something to tell you. I've been diagnosed with early-stage dementia. It's progressing slowly, but it's progressing." I felt my throat tighten. "Catherine, I'm so sorry. Don't be. I've had a good long life and I'm not done yet. But I wanted you to know because I'm going to need help eventually, and you're the closest thing I have to family. Ruth asked me to take care of you, and I did. Now I'm asking if you'll take care of me when the time comes. Of course, without question. You gave me my life back. I'll do whatever you need." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You gave yourself your life back, Marina. I just knocked on the window. You did everything else." Over the next few years, I watched Catherine's decline with sadness, but also with gratitude for the time we still had. She moved into a memory care facility eventually, and I visited her every week, bringing photos and stories, reminding her who she was when she couldn't remember. On her good days, she'd tell me stories about Ruth, about their friendship, about the adventures they'd had. On her bad days, she'd look at me with confusion, asking who I was, and I'd gently remind her, "I'm Marina. You found me when I was lost, and you helped me find my way." She passed away on a Tuesday afternoon in early spring, with me holding her hand. In her will, she'd left me her house, the same house where her guest cottage had sheltered me when I had nowhere else to go. I sold my apartment and moved into Catherine's house, and I converted the guest cottage into an office where I could work on my own projects and run the small nonprofit I'd started, an organization dedicated to designing dignified housing for vulnerable populations. Emma came home for the funeral, bringing her girlfriend Nicole, a social worker she'd met in grad school. They stood beside me as we buried Catherine next to Ruth in a cemetery with old oak trees and soft green grass. I placed a bouquet of lavender and vanilla-scented flowers on both graves, thinking about the chain of women who'd saved me, each in their own way. Looking back now, more than a decade after I'd slept in my car believing my life was over, I can see the journey clearly. The ordinary world where I was trapped and small and convinced I had no value. The call to adventure when Catherine knocked on my window. The crossing of the threshold when I accepted the trust and decided to rebuild. The trials and challenges of going back to school, fighting for custody, learning who I was beyond wife and mother. The transformation as I discovered my strength and purpose. The return with the gift I'd gained. The ability to help others who were struggling the way I had struggled. I'm 54 years old now. I run my own architecture practice specializing in social impact design. I've won several awards for my work in affordable housing and community development. I've written a book about designing with dignity and empathy that's used as a textbook in some architecture schools. I speak regularly about my journey from homelessness to success, not because I think I'm special, but because I want other women to know that rock bottom isn't the end of the story. It can be the beginning. Emma is thriving in her career as a social worker, helping families navigate the same systems I once struggled with. She's getting married next year to Nicole, and they're talking about adopting children. Daniel remarried years ago and has mostly faded from my life except for occasional texts about Emma's milestones. I bear him no ill will anymore. He was part of my journey, but he doesn't define my story. The trust that Ruth established has long since been used up, invested in my education and my business and my life. But it accomplished exactly what she wanted. It gave me the foundation to build something meaningful, to become the person I was always meant to be. And now I'm paying it forward, establishing a scholarship fund for women over 40 who want to return to school, creating opportunities for others the way Ruth created one for me. Sometimes when I'm working late in my office in Catherine's former guest cottage, I think about that night when a stranger knocked on my car window. I think about how close I came to giving up, how easily I could have driven away, refused the help, stayed trapped in my own despair. I think about the courage it took to accept that I deserved more, to believe that I could build a life worth living. And I think about Ruth, who I barely knew but who knew me somehow, who saw past my circumstances to my potential, who believed in me decades before I believed in myself. Her gift wasn't just money. It was permission to dream again, to try again, to fail and get back up and keep going. I still have my old Honda Civic. I could afford a newer car, a better car, but I keep it as a reminder of where I came from and how far I've traveled. Sometimes I sit in the back seat, remembering what it felt like to sleep there, cold and scared and hopeless. But now when I sit there, I feel something different. Pride, gratitude, and an unshakable belief that no matter how far you fall, you can always get back up. You can always start over. You can always build something new from the rubble of what came before. The knock on my window changed everything, but I'm the one who opened the door. I'm the one who accepted the help. I'm the one who did the work to transform my life. Ruth gave me the seed, Catherine gave me the soil, but I'm the one who grew. And now I spend my life knocking on windows, finding women who are sleeping in their cars, literally or metaphorically, and telling them, "You are Marina. You are worth saving. You can build something beautiful from this. Let me show you how."